Don't get me wrong, my father was not a total bastard. He just acted that way most of the time.
Don't get me wrong, my father was not a total bastard. He was just drunk most of the time.
He was, after all, a true outdoorsman.
He was, after all, a true musician.
Maybe he should have never come back from Alaska at the beginning of World War II to marry my mother and join the Navy.
Maybe he never should have come in off the road at the peak of his career and his addiction to marry my mother and start a family.
He saw action that maybe changed him.
He made mistakes that probably changed him, her, us.
I don't know. He did tell me all the stories.
I don't know. I never wanted to listen to his stories.
But from the very earliest, I can remember I never got to tell my stories, nor do I remember him saying encouraging or kind things to me.
But from the very earliest, my father did say encouraging and kind things. He wanted to hear our stories. But by the time we were old enough to share, we didn't want to talk to him.
I do remember learning to hunt, shoot, and fish, even though the lessons were a bit harsh.
I too remember learning to avoid him when his breath smelled funny, where he hid his bottles, and the difference between a slurred and sober I love you. Those lessons were a bit harsh.
I did find myself having fun and becoming quite good, and that did seem to please him.
I did find myself pushing him away and becoming quite good at shutting him out, and that did seem to hurt him.
Sometimes he'd scream, yell. At times he would even hit my mother.
Sometimes he'd scream, but sometimes he'd cry, and he'd scare us and our mother.
Most of the time, nothing my mother, brother, sister, or I did was correct.
Most of the time, he was sad and scared and running from his father and thought nothing he did or could ever do was correct. Don't get me wrong, my father was not a total bastard. He was just hurting most of his life. His pain would spill out in bursts of whiskey-fueled fires that burned fierce and hard and then long and steady as the embers of his father's memory refused to extinguish no matter how furiously he tried to drench them. No, my father was not a bastard. He was a kid who was told he wasn't good enough, who grew into a man who believed it. His father, after all, was a true outdoorsman who didn't say kind and encouraging things and hit his mother and never wanted to hear his stories. Maybe if he had, my father wouldn't have been drunk most of my life.